Have you ever noticed that even when everything seems fine, your mind still refuses to be quiet? You wake up thinking about yesterday's mistakes. You spend the day worrying about tomorrow. You compare your life with people who seem happier, richer, more successful, or more fulfilled than you. You replay conversations you wish you could change. You imagine problems that haven't happened yet. And somehow, even where nothing is actually wrong, your mind finds something to worry about. Maybe you've told yourself that peace will finally come when you make more money. Maybe when you get the right relationship. Maybe when you buy a better house. Maybe when your career finally takes off. Maybe when everyone around you finally understands you. But what happens when you get those things? For many people, the noise doesn't disappear. They simply find new things to worry about. And perhaps that's because the biggest problem isn't that life is too noisy. Perhaps the biggest problem is that we've never learned how to quiet the noise inside ourselves. If you're tired of overthinking, regret, comparison, stress, and constantly feeling like you need to do more, listen carefully, because this story contains a simple lesson about peace that many people spend their entire lives trying to understand. Many years ago, there was a small village surrounded by green hills, quiet rivers, and ancient trees. In that village lived an old man named Alexander. People respected him, but very few understood him. Every morning before sunrise, Alexander would walk toward a hill outside the village. He carried nothing except a wooden walking stick and a small cloth bag. When he reached the top of the hill, he would sit beneath the same old oak tree for hours. He didn't speak, he didn't work, he didn't try to accomplish anything. He simply sat there. The villagers thought he was wasting his time. Some would say if he worked harder, he could earn more. Others would laugh. He's becoming strange in his old age. Alexander never argued with them. He simply smiled. One afternoon, a young traveler named Ethan arrived in the village. Unlike everyone else, Ethan noticed something strange about Alexander. The old man's clothes were simple, his house was small, he owned almost nothing, and yet whenever someone insulted him, Alexander remained calm. Whenever something went wrong, he didn't explode with anger. There was something in his face that Ethan couldn't understand. Peace. Ethan had traveled through many cities. He had met wealthy merchants, powerful leaders, respected teachers, and successful businessmen. Many of them had everything people wanted. Yet almost none of them looked as peaceful as this old man. The next morning, Ethan decided to follow Alexander. He quietly walked behind him until the old man reached the oak tree. Without even turning around, Alexander smiled. "You've been following me since sunrise." Ethan immediately felt embarrassed. "I'm sorry." "There is no need to apologize," Alexander said. "If someone follows peace, he is already walking in the right direction." Ethan sat beside him. For several minutes, neither man spoke. Eventually, Ethan couldn't take the silence anymore. He turned toward Alexander and asked, "Everyone says you own almost nothing, yet you look happier than anyone I've ever met. What is your secret?" Alexander looked at the ground and picked up a small stone. "What do you see?" "A stone." Alexander placed it in Ethan's hand. "Hold it." Ethan held the stone. After a minute, Alexander asked, "Is it heavy?" "No. Keep holding it." 15 minutes passed. Ethan's arm began to shake. Finally, he said, "It hurts." Alexander smiled. "Has the stone become heavier?" "No." "Then why does it hurt?" Ethan looked at the stone. "Because I've been holding it for too long." Alexander nodded. Our worries are exactly like this stone. Hold them for a moment, and they may teach you something. Hold them for a day, and they begin to exhaust you. Hold them for years, and they can slowly destroy you. Ethan remained silent. Then Alexander said something he would never forget. Most people aren't suffering only because life is difficult. They're suffering because they refuse to put the stone down. Ethan frowned. That sounds simple, but people can't just stop worrying. Alexander smiled. "You're right. If peace were easy, everyone would have it." Then he stood up. "Come with me." They walked deeper into the forest. After almost an hour, they reached a beautiful lake. The water was so clear that the clouds were reflected perfectly on its surface. Alexander filled a wooden cup with water. Then he picked up a handful of dry soil and dropped it into the cup. Immediately the water became muddy. "Drink it," Alexander said. Ethan looked at the dirty water. "I can't," Alexander nodded. Then he walked toward the lake and threw another handful of soil into the enormous body of water. Within seconds, the soil disappeared. The lake remained clear. Alexander turned toward Ethan. "What changed?" Ethan thought for a moment. "The amount of water." "Exactly." Alexander pointed toward the lake. "The problem was never the soil. The problem was the size of the container." Then he continued, "When your mind becomes small, every little problem can make your entire life cloudy. But when your heart becomes bigger, through patience, gratitude, kindness, and understanding, the same problem loses its power." Ethan stared across the lake. For the first time in years, he stopped thinking about his failures. He stopped replaying the people who had disappointed him. He stopped worrying about tomorrow. He simply watched the waves move toward the shore. The wind moved through the trees. Birds sang in the distance. And for a few moments, Ethan experienced something he had been searching for his entire life: a quiet mind. But Alexander knew Ethan hadn't yet learned the most important lesson. The next morning before sunrise, a horse stopped outside Alexander's small house. His name was Victor. Victor was one of the richest merchants in the kingdom. His clothes were expensive. His horse was powerful. His bags were filled with gold. But his face looked exhausted. His eyes were filled with fear. "I've traveled for many days looking for you," Victor said. "People say you're the wisest man alive." Alexander smiled. "I'm only an old man." Victor shook his head. "I have everything people dream about. But I cannot sleep. I cannot enjoy my food. I don't trust anyone. And every day I live in fear of losing what I have." Alexander looked at Ethan. "This is another lesson." The three men walked toward the old oak tree. Victor couldn't stop talking. "My business keeps growing. My houses keep getting bigger. My money keeps increasing. I worry about my enemies. I worry about thieves. I worry about tomorrow. I don't even remember the last time I smiled from my heart." Alexander listened quietly. Then he asked, "When was the last time you watched a sunrise without thinking about work?" Victor said nothing. "When was the last time you ate because you were hungry instead of because it was time?" Again, silence. "When was the last time you thanked life for what you already had?" Victor lowered his eyes. "I don't remember." Alexander picked up a dry leaf that had fallen from the oak tree. "Do you know why this leaf is beautiful?" Neither Ethan nor Victor answered. Alexander held the leaf up to the wind. "Because it doesn't fight the wind." Then he released it. The wind carried the leaf across the field. It didn't complain, it didn't resist, it simply moved with the wind until it gently came to rest on the ground. Alexander looked at the two men. People lose their peace because they want to control everything. They want every person to understand them. They want every plan to succeed. They want everyone to behave the way they expect. They want life to follow the script they wrote in their minds. But life has never worked that way. The moment you accept that you cannot control everything, something inside you becomes lighter. Victor finally asked, "So should I stop working?" Alexander smiled. "No. Work with your hands. Do not carry your work inside your heart. Earn money. Do not let money own your mind. Love people. Do not expect them to be perfect. Make plans, but remember that life may write a different ending." Those words stayed with Ethan, because he suddenly realized something. Peace wasn't something you found after solving every problem. Peace was something you protected while problems were still present. Days passed. Ethan stayed with Alexander. They repaired broken fences. They planted trees. They shared food with hungry families. They worked, but Alexander never seemed rushed. Even while doing ordinary tasks, he remained present. One evening, Ethan finally asked, "Master, what is the greatest secret of your life?" Alexander looked toward the setting sun. "When I was young, I wanted to change the whole world. When I became older, I wanted to change the people around me. But when I became old, I realized something." Ethan waited. Alexander smiled. "The only person I truly needed to change was myself." Ethan felt tears forming in his eyes. Alexander continued, "I wasted many years fighting things I could never control. But the day I accepted life instead of constantly fighting it, peace quietly entered my heart." And perhaps that's the lesson most of us need. We spend so much energy trying to control things that were never ours to control. We want to control what people think of us. We want to control whether someone stays or leaves. We want to control the future. We want to rewrite the past. We want to make every plan work. We want certainty before we take another step. But the more tightly we grip life, the more exhausted we become. Sometimes peace doesn't come from gaining more control. Sometimes peace comes from releasing the control you never truly had. Months later, Alexander became very weak. The villagers gathered around his small house. Even the people who had once laughed at him came to see him. Victor returned from the city. Ethan sat beside Alexander's bed. The old man smiled and pointed toward the window. Outside, children were laughing. Birds were singing. Trees were moving gently in the wind. Alexander whispered, "Life has always been peaceful." He paused. "We were simply too busy to notice." Those were his final words. Alexander closed his eyes peacefully. The room became silent. But something strange happened. No one immediately cried. Instead, everyone felt something they hadn't expected: gratitude. Years passed. Ethan eventually became an old man himself, and every morning he walked toward the same oak tree. Whenever someone asked him where he had learned to live peacefully, he would smile and say, "From a man who owned almost nothing, yet possessed everything that truly mattered." The old oak tree remained on the hill. People continued visiting it, hoping they would somehow find peace there. But eventually they discovered the truth. Peace had never been hidden inside the tree. It had always been hidden inside the way they chose to live. And maybe that's the message you need today. You don't need to solve your entire life before you are allowed to feel peaceful. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need everyone to understand you. You don't need to know exactly what tomorrow will bring. You don't need to become richer before you can appreciate what you already have. You don't need a perfect life. Because there will always be another problem, another responsibility, another uncertainty, another person who disappoints you, another goal you haven't reached. If you make peace dependent on everything going perfectly, you may spend your entire life waiting for peace to arrive. Instead, learn to put the stone down. Learn to release what you cannot control. Learn to appreciate what is already here. Learn to forgive what cannot be changed. Learn to stop comparing your life with someone else's. And learn to be present enough to notice the small moments that are already beautiful. Because sometimes you're so busy searching for a better life that you completely miss the life you're already living. The sunlight through the window, a quiet morning, a meal you didn't have to worry about, someone who genuinely cares about you, a conversation, a walk, a moment of laughter, a breath. These things may look insignificant when you're constantly chasing something bigger, but one day you may realize they were never insignificant at all. Remember this: a calm mind makes better decisions than a worried mind. A grateful heart can enjoy more than a wealthy one. And sometimes the strongest person in the room isn't the loudest person. It's the person who has learned not to let every problem steal their peace. You cannot control the past. You cannot control every future situation. You cannot control what other people say. You cannot control how everyone treats you. But you can choose your response. You can choose gratitude instead of constant comparison. You can choose forgiveness instead of carrying old pain. You can choose patience instead of panic. You can choose presence instead of endlessly worrying about tomorrow. And most importantly, you can choose to put down the stone. Because maybe your life isn't asking you to carry more. Maybe it's asking you to release what you've been carrying for far too long.